And we're live. Welcome everybody here to the Lakers Lounge. I'm Anthony Irwin, joined today by friend of the show, friend of me personally, somebody I'm looking forward to seeing in like 24 hours or so in person, where he can't just like hop off of the Skype and not hear my takes anymore. Matt Moore of the Action Network. How you doing, buddy?
I'm doing well, man. Thanks for having me on again.
You are you a Threads guy now? Are you a Blue Sky guy now? Are you a
Both.
Twitter
I'm
guy now?
covering all the bases. Threads is tough because there's not a desktop app. So I'm like,
Yeah.
I don't know how you're posting as much as you have to like, you're like, hit me up on Threads to post this. And I was like, how did you type this out? Like, I don't understand, like, I don't know how to do all this. And
Uh huh.
here's the thing, I'm pretty good with technology, but I got to have the tools. And like, a lot of these things are just not giving me the tools to do this stuff.
Yeah.
So I like Blue Sky, but if it looks like Threads is going to win, I'll be on there as well.
So what I did for Threads, because I cannot type, because of the same problem you're talking about with desktop, I actually copied the text from the tweet that I was going to send into Slack, grabbed it from Slack on my phone, and then threw it on Threads.
Elon
Uh,
Musk, man, thanks for doing this, man. Just thanks so much for putting us through this, buddy. Appreciate you for just making everyone's lives a little worse every day.
it's just unbelievable. It's wild how he fumbled the bag. Like Dennis Schroeder is like, dude, what the hell? Like,
At least does me a little bit of that back up with Toronto, which that doesn't make any
yeah.
sense. But yeah.
Yeah. All right. So today's show, we are going to talk about the offseason that the Lakers have had so far. It is now just about over. I think right now they're basically deciding between Tristan Thompson and Colin Castleton for their 14th roster spot. I'm going to, for up until this point, I've thought and been told that it was probably going to be Thompson as kind of like a locker room presence, Jared Dudley who can get in there and occasionally, if Jackson Hayes is not, up for the task that night, get in there and mix things up a little bit. But the more I have kind of looked at their books and stuff, and given how close they are to the tax, I find myself wondering if they are instead going to go with Castleton, who would be signed to a deal about 2-ish million less than Thompson is going to make. And if they do that and leave that 15th roster spot open, I think they are either right below or right at the tax, but certainly close enough that they can get under it by season's end, which I guess is still kind of similar to where they would be with Thompson, but this would get that just about done right at the very beginning of the season. So as that might be the roster, as it looks like they'll have 14 guys going into it next year, they pick up Vincent, they pick up Torian Prince, they pick up Jackson Hayes, they bring back Rui and Reeves and D'Lo to add to. Oh, they also opted into the Jared Vanderbilt deal, which is crazy because not crazy that they picked it up, but crazy that I had no idea that it was an option. That was not anywhere that I was seeing, but yeah, that is going to be basically their team next year. And Matt, you work for the Action Network. You guys, in my maybe slightly biased opinion, put together the best betting content I think out there. And I wanted to ask you, as we typically do every year, how you think we should bet on the Lakers next year. So let's start macro. Let's say the Lakers come in, their win loss total comes in at like 40. No, maybe we'll say 50. Maybe Vegas thinks they're a 50-win team. How close do you think that is to the number that they come in at? And B, where would you bet it?
The Lakers are fascinating from this perspective. So a couple of things from a win totals perspective to kind of keep in mind. They most closely start as a baseline related to what's called your Pythagorean expected wins, which is like you take your point differential and you extrapolate that out and you reach essentially what's a number for like what they should be at. Okay. From last season. They should have been last season based on full season numbers. And again, this is full season numbers. They were projected at 42. Okay. And you go like, well, that's not who they were. They were not that team. They were the team that they were after the All-Star break, which I am kind of like, okay, you just can't throw out that. Like they were both teams.
Mhm.
Maybe closer to, they were definitely closer to the
The
other
whole
one.
season did happen.
Right. And here's what's really fascinating is I do think you have to weight it towards who they were after.
Yeah.
After they were 51.
Mm.
So we have a 42 and we have a 51. And so the question is, where in there do you run out when you factor in for what they look like from how the offseason and the playoffs turned out as well? You also have to factor in that there's always a Lakers bump. They are the most public team in the NBA. They are the Dallas Cowboys of the NBA. So they are always going to take on public money. And bookmakers have told me this, that there are teams that are public, that they will artificially bump higher, knowing they can get away with it.
Yeah.
And there are teams that they bump lower, knowing they can get away with it. So Memphis, they'll always drop it. Like they will always drop it because nobody's like, they want to get money on that action. Nobody bets Memphis most years. This era is a little bit different with how popular they are, but like a random team that's like, oh, the Magic are going to come in probably lower than what they would be at baseline because you adjust for how public they are. As we kind of like look at all this, I'm with you in how you've presented what they've done with the offseason, which is fine to good, I think is a really good definition of what they did. It's somewhere between fine and good. I think when you start adding on adverbs to good is when it starts to be like a little bit of a stretch, not a massive one. If you're like, it was really good, I'm like, okay.
Yeah.
A little bit, pull back a little bit. When we get into like, they had an amazing offseason.
What if I say pretty good?
Now,
chill. That's not
right.
What if I say pretty good? Pretty good's a fine.
That's fine. Pretty good is like, that's like the adverb to use. It's like pretty good. Yeah, that was pretty good. I think the best way for me to kind of look at it is they traded out parts for similar parts that might fit better while retaining the key components they had to. Like, there was no way they were losing Reeves, but if they had just been like, nah, we're going to let Reeves walk, that would have been an abject disaster. The D'Lo thing, I think, is the one that I'm kind of like, I don't know. Like, you probably just should have like I would have bit the bullet and just been like, either he leaves or we find a sign and trade. I would have gone that route.
They were trying to find a sign and trade. Nobody's trading right now.
Nobody's trading for him. So you do what you can. It's better to. This is where a lot of teams are at, where it's better to have the asset than not have the asset. I don't know how much I agree with that, short or long term, but I understand the thinking of it. So all of this is to say that if we have the regular season number of 41, and we have the after the trade number of 51. And we kind of come in where I think 50 is maybe a reasonable number to get to. I think that's like possible. I could see with the Lakers bump, I could see their baseline for this being around 48 and then getting a two game bump based off of the expectation of LeBron and 80. And they just made the Western Conference Finals, and we can put this at 50 and we know that we'll still get money on the over because everyone loves the Lakers. And then we can go the other way. It's very rare that now I will say this, there's also sharp books and there are not so sharp books. So a sharp book is a book like the Superbook in Las Vegas, and they have operations in a number of states. You may see that like FanDuel, DraftKings, Bet365, Caesars, they may put out a number that's like 49 and a half, 50, 50 and a half. And then you might see that like Superbook comes in at 48 and a half. Superbook makes their own lines. They are much more willing to take stances, and they have historically been much more on the thing of, if you want to bet the Lakers, that's fine with us. Like they have gone the opposite approach, which is we're not going to artificially bump it. We're actually going to go lower, which attracts more action because we're comfortable with our number. And we believe that there's a good enough chance for them to go under. So from that perspective, I think that probably 50 and a half in the public. I also think that probably by the time the training camp, like we get through they may open 48 and a half, 49. And then we get to a 50. If this pops at like 45 and a half, I just can't see that holding because they'll get hammered with over money. Like that's the halfway point, right? Is like 46 and a half ish would be about between the two. If they put this number anywhere south of 47, they're going to get hammered with over, and they don't want that. You don't want your liability to be uneven. So it's got to be above 47. I think it's got to be below 51. So somewhere in that range is where I would expect it. And that's honestly about where I would have it as well.
Yeah, I want to go back to some terminology here, and most people listening to this understand most of this stuff. But like the notion of the Lakers being a public team, that just means the amount of money that comes in on them. More money comes in on the Lakers than any other team in the NBA, and because of that, like you're saying, it allows those books to have a little bit of fun with what the Lakers are doing, and that's why I say, when people hear me say that I bet conservatively on the Lakers, I take that into account. I think the Lakers are probably like a, 48, 49 win team next year. Mostly because there just aren't very many wins to go around in the West right now.
Mhm.
Like the until Portland trades Dame, which we think is going to happen, but until that happens, the only team that we can say is going into next season like not trying to win is San Antonio, and all they did is add a prodigious talent in Victor Wembanyama. So outside of that, and yeah, like over the course of the season, you'll have teams that start the year wanting to do one thing, and then they'll realize, okay, yeah, we aren't going to win much in this crazy West or whatever, and they'll fall off too. But yeah, heading into this Western Conference, there are not very many wins to go around. So I think everybody's unders are going to be suppressed. Or I would hammer just about everybody's unders in the West going into next year.
So a couple of interesting things on this is, one, unlike in NFL basically, it's always profitable to bet unders. Unders hit way more often over the course of time than overs do in the NFL. In the NBA, this has not been the case. It is very even, and it fluctuates basically every other year with it being within a certain range, one way or the other. But there's not nearly this consistency across of the under being valuable. And that also gets into what number you're laying in terms of the VIG, because like some numbers will be like by the time that we get to the start of the season, there may be a Lakers under 50.5 minus 120, where it's like, we're going to keep the number high, but you got to pay more juice for it. And then with an over plus 105, right? Like those differences of how much you pay on the VIG, which is the extra money you're taking off the bet, or actually you're getting, is kind of how that's determined as well. The other thing I would say is this era of parity, like this is the one thing that nobody knows, because this year we had like an incredible amount of parity. We had this was a very outlier year in terms of how the wins were distributed. If we see a reversion next year to more of a top heavy, middle chunk, really low bottom, and we had some very bad teams at the bottom this year, but we see more of the distribution of because what we had this year is basically two teams at the top in the Bucks and the Celtics, and then everybody else in the middle chunk, and then like Detroit, San Antonio, Houston at the bottom. If we see some of that redistribution back to a normal curve, a normal distribution of where we see these wins come in, then it's going to make, I think, the overs on some teams a lot more profitable. And you say like those wins have got to come from somewhere. I kind of hesitate on that because we do have this idea that the schedules are even. This is one of the areas that I do think that there's a little bit of, not a big, but a little bit of an edge to doing the deep dive work on schedule work. Is that we have this idea that, well, everybody just plays everybody. That's not accurate. Right. The Lakers will play their division teams 4 times. So they're playing the Warriors, the Kings, the Clippers, and the Suns. Those are all playoff teams. They play those teams.
They're all trying to be playoff teams again next year.
And then because they're the Lakers and they're good, they'll also play Denver 4 times. They will play. I'm trying to think who else they'll play. Some of the other good Dallas. They'll probably play 4 times because you want those national TV games. So the Lakers schedule will probably be a little bit tougher than average. It washes out for the most part because also it doesn't. You can have a game where it's like, oh, they had to play Dallas twice. Oh, but Lucas set out 2 of them. So it all kind of evens out over the course of a 6 months, way too long season. One thing I think is interesting, you kind of mentioned where you would have them. So my baseline number based off of last year's performance, I have them at 44 wins. Obviously, that's not accurate based off of how they performed post All-Star. So the question is like, I have them at a power rating of 1.1. Like, how much do I raise them up? And you have to understand that every point is a massive thing. This is what I was laughing about with how people approach some of these things on Twitter, where they're like, well, he's clearly worth like 15 wins. No player in the NBA is worth 15 wins, guys. 0 players in the NBA are worth 15 wins. If you get to 6, you're talking Jokic, you're talking Giannis, you're talking LeBron.
Yeah, I was going to ask, like, what's the highest number that you'll see on a player?
I think 6 is about as high as it would ever be in terms of a swing, especially from a win total perspective. Like if Jokic was out for the entire season, knock on wood that doesn't happen. If Jokic was out the entire season, you would have to adjust Denver's win total by at least 6. Like but if you start getting into 10, are you going to drop them from 51 to 41 for a team that retains the championship core? maybe,
Yeah.
but you could bet the under. Like, you're welcome to bet the under, but there's only so far the books will go. Where I came out is I popped them up to 2.5 based off of where they were at post All-Star. And then I gave them another half-point bump because I'm like, Torian Prince, I think, is a good addition.
Mm-hmm.
Gabe Vincent, I think, is a good addition. And I'm okay with the guys that they gave up. Like, I'd rather have Gabe Vincent than Dennis Schroeder. So kind of factor in all this and the chemistry and how it fits and all that stuff. So I bumped them up to a 3, and this pops us out at a 49 win total. So that kind of gives you an indication. If the number pops at 50, I'm probably staying away because that's well within the margin of injury error. If it goes at 45, I'll have to bet the Lakers. Like, I'll just immediately have to bet the Lakers. If the number comes in at like something ridiculous, like 53, which I can't imagine, but if it came in at 53, if they really take a 7 seed and give them 53 wins next season, I'll immediately bet the under for multiple units.
Yeah, it's funny because from what I've seen, and I'm relatively new to the gambling game, and certainly new as it pertains to like really studying up on this stuff before I put money on it. Before it was just like, oh, I have some money in my account, screw it, I'll just kind of see how this thing plays out. But one thing that I've really noticed is narratives as it pertains to the Lakers are pretty impactful for the way that their seasons are set up in Vegas. And what I mean by that is like right now, if you listen to almost any national podcast, just about everybody not named Tim Bontemps is pretty high on the Lakers offseason, right? Wow, they were able to keep Reeves at a good number. They were able to keep Rui at a fairly good number. I think more people a little down on Rui's final number than certainly than Reeves. Reeves' contract is unbelievable. D'Angelo Russell's like, well, there's the asset aspect of it, but there's also like the talent aspect of it, and I think the Lakers do need D'Angelo Russell's talent. But what I'm saying is Vegas, kind of takes that into account and applies that by what people are listening to, and will inflate some stuff based on what the narrative is about the Lakers. And that's why, again, people take it as if I'm betting against the Lakers, that I routinely bet against the Lakers. But I would more frame my approach to betting the Lakers as a wait and see kind of thing. Like you're talking about, there is so much gap here between where the Lakers could finally stand on this, as it pertains to just this one bet. That like it's impossible really to say right now how I feel about them going in, but there are some trends, and I do think like we have a general frame for where you and I have them, and I think that is something to work off of. Long-term bets though are a different matter altogether. I think chances at winning the championship and stuff like that, there is almost never value on the Lakers at the beginning of the season to win a championship. Never.
So, well, except for the fact that they do it so often. I think.
Yeah.
So if you look at it, a good way to do this is on Action Network. We've got tools that actually allow you to figure out what the implied odds are at the price. Okay. Mm-hmm. So one book in particular, it's plus 900. Okay. And that comes out, if you do the implied odds, that's a 10% chance. So you have a 10% chance of winning the NBA title right now.
Yeah.
And if you listen to that and you think, well, I think that's low. I think they were in the Western Conference Finals. They were competitive in every game versus Denver, who was the most dominant team. They had the best net rating versus Denver of any team. They had the best performance of any team versus Denver statistically. Mm-hmm. I think that number is too low. I think it should be 15, 17, 20. Then technically speaking, that is an EV bet. That's an effective value bet, expected value bet. Like you think that this is higher than what the implied is. And that's where your analysis comes in at. One of the things I think that's difficult with all of this is the injury factor for the books, for the most part, is kind of even, where there's an expected chance of injury that they will adjust if, like, the Clippers are going to have to be negated a little bit because of the number of games that Kawhi will miss.
Yeah.
Like, that's just like implied that you're going to miss this many games. And I think that there's a little bit of that with Anthony Davis. But for the most part, these numbers are primarily set based on the idea that they're going to be healthy. It's like, on average, what does a healthy team look like? And it's like, all right, if the Lakers are completely healthy and they have the best injury luck next year, and AD plays 70 plus games and all of this, then their number probably tops out a little higher.
Mm-hmm.
Like, it probably comes in 54. Like, this team can very easily win 55 games next season. Mm-hmm. And that's even with me accounting that I don't think that necessarily that this is an elite great team. That's got nothing to do with how many games you can win in the regular season. You can absolutely just rattle off a bunch of wins and get to 54, 55. It's, I think, difficult with what their profile looks like, especially offensively, but you can get there, right? Mm-hmm. But injuries automatically start dinging you down. And so trying to figure out the variance of a 39-year-old LeBron mm-hmm. and Anthony Davis is like, it creates, I think, a well of uncertainty that makes it very difficult to bet them. It's the same way, I bet the Clippers over last year, and I like the Clippers value last year, and I love the way that they constructed their roster. And a lot of it was like their bench depth, which I was like, oh, they're so deep, they're going to be fine even if Kawhi and PG miss times. Nope, all of those guys underperformed. Collectively, individually, everyone sucked except Terrence Mann. And so, like, that outcome basically got crushed by what was the already implied odds that Kawhi and PG were going to miss time, which they both did. So I think trying to figure out the variance here. You also talked about the narrative impact. I'll say this. There's certainly like wells of optimism that will move the numbers, where they will come out with a number. And then if there is but you have to understand that there is a big difference between this is something I think that most people don't really consider. Okay. If I make a bet, it's entirely different than if a large, not just money, but if a known bettor that's incredibly sharp, that they respect as an impact bettor that has consistently won money, if that person puts in a bet over or under, that will have more of an impact than 30 of me's, mm-hmm. even if it's for the same value. So that's where a lot of this comes in with the narrative. Is it's not, you're getting two different forces of pressure, which is if the sharp money comes in on the over and the public comes in on the over, it'll go up. If the sharp money comes in on the under and the public money comes in on the over, it'll stay where it is because they're happy with that. They've got an even distribution on both sides, and they're taking the vig and they're coming out ahead. So all of these kind of factors are what influence the market. There's this idea that you want even sides on even money on both sides. That's not accurate. Like, there are most books will take a position of we are comfortable with money on this side versus the other side. And again, the Superbook to me is the strongest book in this regard, where they are very open, and they've done this with the Lakers in the past when there was hype on them, where they would have a number that was 2 to 3 wins lower, and they were still fine with you. Like, they took on the over money and they were comfortable with it because their odds makers made a projection and are comfortable with taking a position on what that's going to work out, which was to the under, and it did.
Yeah. The last thing here on the gambling stuff, and I can't help, but I want to poke your brain about the Dame stuff, because sure. It's just we can't escape it. But the last thing on the individual stuff with the Lakers, is there anybody that you're looking at next year who you would see decent odds at to win an individual award, given that the media hates the Lakers and will never ever vote for them for anything?
I'm trying to think. I think Reeves' most improved might be in play. That's one that I could see. Right? Like, I think Austin Reeves.
Oh yeah, for the most improved. Mm-hmm.
I think that's the case. Like, if Reeves becomes a third star, if you're just like, I think Reeves is legitimately going to be like a star next season, then there's probably like an opportunity there to find a little bit of value. The only other, like, I've already bet Shai Gilgeous-Alexander to win MVP. That's like a bet I've already put into the app. It's like 42-1 because a combination of factors, but basically, if everything were to work out to the optimum, if you have an outlier situation, then that's what it works at. The other thing I would say is if you're going to bet these futures, particularly for the awards or title, I would honestly tell you, do not bet anything that's below 10-1 before we get in season. It's not worth it. If you're making one bet for the year and you just want to be able to root for one team, if you're listening to this and you're just like, yeah, but I want to bet on the Lakers because they're my favorite team. Okay, go bet them at 9-1 and carry that through. Historically, what's surprising is you would not believe what the numbers are before the playoffs relative to preseason. 6 months of data, all those games played, all of the injuries, all of the variants, how many things can change, and you're very rarely getting a lot of value. Like you're just not getting a lot. If you bet the Lakers at 9-1, I would tell you that there's a very good chance that they are only 6-1 at best by the time that the playoffs roll around. And that is even if they have a great season. You are way better off waiting on numbers below 10 to get to midseason before the playoffs. At some point, you will get a slightly sharper number, a slightly shorter number. But you will still have great value having already gone through, LeBron's not out for the season, AD's not out for the season. Things
Austin did
out.
pop. And
Austin did pop. D'Lo hasn't completely blown up the team. Like all of these things.
Or they've traded him.
Yeah, like all of these things will have factored in. The only reason that you should bet Lakers 9-1 right now, even if you want one bet for the season that's on the Lakers, the only reason you would do that is if you're like, I think they trade for Damian Lillard by midseason, or I think they trade for James Harden, or it has to be, there is an element that the books cannot account for that is likely to happen. And keep in mind, if we look at like the Damian Lillard situation is a great example of this. The Heat were like 22-1. The Dame stuff comes out. They moved to 16-1. I got them at 14-1. It's now 10-1. That's not even indicative of where they will be after the trade is done because the books have to count in the variance of what if they don't get him. Like until it's done, they can't move that number to where it should be. Yeah. Which is probably they moved to 4.5-1 or less, which is where about the Bucks are. Like they will have to move them dramatically. And like that's a situation where I got EV, but I'm betting multiple teams to win the championship all through the season. Like I build portfolios of a bunch of different teams.
Yeah.
Except for the Sixers. I had the Lakers as part of that portfolio last year because I was just like, what if they're just really good? And so like that's something to keep in mind. If you're looking to bet one team, and especially if it's the Lakers, wait, you'll get a better price later on.
Yeah, and like if LeBron tweaks a hammy, that number's gonna drop lower. Correct. And like Correct. It's just those are that's why I say I almost never like that's the most popular bet that people ask me about, and I always feel like such a wet blanket when I say stay away, because that's the one that like people are like, well, the Lakers 9-1 to win a championship. I'm like, I'm telling you, just wait for like a week. Anthony Davis is going to stub his toe and he's going to miss 2 weeks, and that's when you can jump on the Lakers at like 15-1.
And I will note that number I gave out for 9-1 is for the West. They're 15-1 to win the title, right? Yeah. And so if you're like, okay, but I want them to win the entire thing because it's only one more round, that's like 6.25%. And if you're just like, well, I think they have a 10% chance of winning it. Again, you have EV, but I would also tell you that even at 15-1 for a team like the Lakers, you'll get a better price later. Like you mentioned, this is my favorite, not this last season, the season before, 21-22. Steph goes down with an ankle injury in January, I think is when he got hurt.
Yeah.
And immediately the books have to react. So the odds for the Warriors go way, way down.
Yeah.
And if you paid attention,
I bet them then.
Yeah. If you pay attention to like the beat writers, Anthony Slater and Tim Kawakami and Marcus Thompson, everybody's is tweeting quotes from Kerr that's like, yeah, we don't, we're pretty confident he'll be back for the playoffs. And that like all the intel and background too of like the Warriors are confident he'll be back for the playoffs. Mm-hmm. Once I heard that, it's like, this is an ankle tweak. He's going to be back and he's going to be fine. And then all of a sudden these odds are going to look ridiculous, but they have to account for that injury. Like they have to react to things that happen. And so you're able to get better prices on there if you're able to say, okay, but he's not going to miss the playoffs. He's going to be back and he's going to be fine. This is an ankle tweak. It's fine. Mm-hmm. And we got really good prices on the Warriors because of that. So again, same thing with the Lakers, where it's like, yeah, LeBron tweaked a hamstring. He's going to be out a month. The odds are going to drop and you'll have a better price on him then.
Yeah.
Now, hold on. I got one more thing for you.
Yeah.
Because you mentioned like the long-term stuff. When we start to narrow down, the division is maybe where you can find some value. Because they're going to have to be 50 is 50. If they're at 50, that's a high number, right? Because like I don't expect
Mhm.
the Kings to be 50 even after last season. So it's like the Suns are going to be above 50. They'll be probably 51 and a half, 52 and a half. I would be shocked if the Suns were not 52 and a half. So you're going to get a plus number on the Lakers. So if you just want to narrow it down to, I think the Lakers will be better than the Warriors, the Suns, and the Kings, and then the Clippers are the Clippers. If you want to like just get into that range, you'll probably be able to get them at a pretty good plus number. Like that's the kind of bet where you can get better value because again, that's a thing that will change once they start playing games. If the Lakers jump out to a 10-1 start, then that number is going to go to a minus really quickly, even if the Suns are still anchored as the favorite.
Last year was the first time a 5-team division all made the playoffs, right?
I think so.
That had does that like and all teams you could make the argument. Well, we got to see what happens with James Harden. If the Clippers get James Harden though, this is the best division of all time, right? Like this is because like you'd have to look at like the Southwest Division back when you had the Spurs and the Mavs and the Rockets were good, right? But like this is pretty damn cool. This is insane. Like that, like it really, and you're playing those guys like once a week, basically. You know, by it's a bananas team.
I'm looking at so like here's a good comparison for you, okay? And this one actually would be better because all 5 teams were good. 2009 was a really pretty great year for that Southwest Division. Like that's an incredibly good year. The Atlantic's had some runs, but like 08 is probably the better one. The Hornets had 56 wins. The Spurs had 56 wins. The Rockets had 55 wins. The Mavericks had 51 wins. But you had the Grizzlies that won 22. So like there's nobody to beat up in this division this season. Like they're all good unless somebody falls apart. Right.
Yeah, unless somebody gets hurt and then everybody beats up on them.
Yeah. But even then, I will say, I talked about the schedule and it does matter, but there's so much freaking variance, especially I think with this one where it's like, yeah, you got to face the Clippers, but are Kawhi and PG playing that night?
Probably not.
With the Lakers, it's genuinely like, are they hurt? Like, it's just like, are LeBron and AD hurt versus a rest management thing? The Warriors is a little bit of a rest thing. If the league gives you, because like the Wolves beat the Nuggets twice last year because they got the Nuggets 3 times on a back-to-back. Like if the league gives you that kind of schedule, you got a real opportunity to rack up wins in the division.
Yeah. All right. Really quickly, I want to talk about Dame and the free agency that stars want in trade demands. And the notion that teams owe it to, like Portland owes it to Dame to send him to Miami. And I know that I'm not necessarily the best voice to in this discussion because of the way that things went down with Anthony Davis. But even with AD, the Lakers still gave up a boatload of picks.
Yes.
And they gave up really talented young players, right? Lonzo went on and got a max contract later. Brandon Ingram is on a max contract right now. Josh Hart was a playoff impact player. Even Larry Nance Jr. was had some flashes here and there too. So like, if we're comparing the hauls that we're talking about for Dame and AD, it's no comparison because right now the offer I believe stands at like Kyle Lowry, Tyler Hero, and a couple picks, maybe a couple pick swaps. It's not comparable to me. And that's why I guess I feel okay chiming in on it. But the notion that like Portland owes it specifically to Dame, does Dame not owe anything to Portland either? Does that not, like, if we just talk about what both sides have at stake here, because the notion is that Portland owes it to Dame to send him somewhere. Otherwise they won't get stars, as if they were getting them before. But like for Dame, the thing that has made him as popular as he is the loyalty that he has had to Portland. But if now all of a sudden he makes this mess and refuses to go anywhere but Miami and be happy, is he not kind of tarnishing the legacy that he's built here too? Like I kind of feel like that door swings both ways.
If things didn't end badly, they wouldn't end. right? I
Yeah.
think that's part of the equation here. The other thing I would say is, I think Dame has fulfilled what he owes to Portland in the moments that he's given the franchise and the fans. Like, he's given them the iconic shots over James
Yeah.
Harden's Rockets and over Paul George in the playoffs. And like, those are the signature moments. A Western Conference Finals appearance, all of these playoff appearances, all of these Dame time moments. He's given the fans a lot of joy. He's given the franchise, he's made the franchise a lot of money. Okay.
Yeah.
So I think he's done his part there. The question I have is there a responsibility to not hurt them on the way out the door? I don't think he needs to ensure that they get great value for him, but what he's doing is he's actively ensuring that they get horrible value for him.
Yeah.
He has selected the one team with what, in my opinion, is the worst trade package available. That's a combination of the picks that are available, the assets they have on roster,
Contracts going out,
the contracts going out, and the likelihood that those picks that they're going to convey are going to be in the high 20s. If you're a team that literally never rebuilds like the Heat, you're never going to get, like, you do those deals because you're like, hey, maybe down the line, like this year, had the Lakers lost in the play-in tournament and then moved up in the lottery and the Pelicans had gotten a pick, like, that's the kind of stuff that we're talking about here. Like, that's what part of the value the Pelicans got, was that outside shot at getting an incredible value pick.
At one point, we thought that pick was going to be Wembanyama. While Westbrook was still on the team, there was a lot of talk that could be Wembanyama.
Right. And that's like what you do. But with the Heat, that's almost zero. So they don't want to add that in. But to me, that's part of the equation. The Heat side is like, well, Jovic is a first-round pick. Okay, he was 29th, did not play hardly at all last year. And they're like, but he's good. I was like, he could be. It's why it's a little bit more similar, honestly, to the Marc Gasol trade. I'm not sorry, not the Marc Gasol trade, the Pau Gasol trade, where you look at that trade and you're like, the Grizzlies got Marc Gasol in that deal. But at the time, everybody's like, great, they got the fat brother. That's all anybody thought.
Yeah.
It was like,
he was not on radars. And by the way, like, there was like a lot of chance that went into them picking Marc Gasol. There was another player that that like could have been selected there, that they like flipped the coin and they were like, yeah, sure, I guess we'll take Marc. Yeah. Whatever.
And so that's like how that winds up working out. Like, that one's a little bit closer, I think, because the Pelicans deal, like, you genuinely gave good value. Like, the Lakers gave good value for a player of Anthony Davis's stature. That was a good return.
Especially compared to the offers that were coming in elsewhere, right? Like, Boston wasn't putting in Jason Tatum. Hilariously, the Knicks weren't putting in Kevin Knox, who... You know,
it's like,
it's funny to mention now, but like at the time they were like, even he isn't on the table.
And that's where, you know, I've got a Heat colleague that has been like, well, where are these other offers then? Nobody's offering for a 34-year-old Dame. I was like, if he's that bad of a contract, why do you want him so bad? But the other thing here is, well, yeah, because Dame is actively, like, Dame's agency, it's not Dame. Dame's agency is actively poisoning the well. Yeah. And that's where I start to be like, this is where I start to get frustrated with the whole thing. I don't mind that Dame wants out.
Nope.
I don't mind the Dame wants a contender. I don't mind the Dame has a list, has preferred locations, that he'd rather go to a coastal city rather than Minnesota. Like, I think Minnesota would be awesome with him. I understand he'd rather go to an East Coast team than Minnesota. Fine. But when you're like, it's only one team, I start to be like, And then
this isn't free agency.
Yeah. Like, and then it's like, it's only
if
one
you wanted
team,
to go to Minnesota, don't take the extension.
And you're forcing Portland to take what is objectively the worst offer available for a franchise superstar. And if you go like, but Dame's the reason, like, Dame's made his own value. My problem with that is the people in Portland, the front office, the development staff, the coaching, the player development staff, the marketing department, everybody in that organization had a hand in building Dame up.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, does that mean that they get like the majority of the share for Dame's success? No. Does that mean that they get 20% of Dame's success? No. Does it mean that they get 10%? Probably not. But there is a stakeholder. They have built something in and they need to get return. And especially, you kind of mentioned the assets going out, the contracts. Oh, but they're getting Kyle Lowry's expiring contract. What's Portland going to do with that cap space?
Yeah.
There's nothing, especially, like, it will be okay if they take the right approach with it, which is, all right, you let Kyle walk, and then you basically do what Detroit did and what OKC's done for years, which is you go to all these teams that have overpaid, and you go, we'll take on your contract if you give us draft compensation.
Yeah.
But part of this problem too is in the midst of all this, guess what? One of those contracts the team should be willing to be looking to move in such a situation. It's the Jeremy Grant contract, which they agreed to under the premise that Dame would be there. Like, do you think Joe Cronin would have done the hand? And by the way, like, this is what's really funny. Well, they didn't have to sign him to that deal. They agreed to the Jeremy Grant deal months ago. That's been known around the league. Like, there's a reason that that Jeremy Grant has not popped on any radars and any of the slot pieces that have come out. It's because everyone in the NBA knew that by All-Star, that deal was handshake done. They were going to do this deal for that number. And it's poison. So on some level, I don't mind Dame and what he's done. I don't mind wanting a contender. I think it's fair for him to want out. Honestly, I think a lot of this too is this is not coming from Dame. It's coming from his agency that is actively, and you can say like they're working with his consent. And that's probably the best way to put this is Dame is not actively like upset with his agency for doing this, but I don't feel like this is where the whole idea of he'll be unhappy if he goes somewhere else. Everyone in the NBA I've talked to has kind of chuckled at that. It's like, if Dame gets traded to Minnesota, he's going to show up, he's going to play hard, and they're going to win games. If he gets traded to New York, he's going to show up, he's going to play hard, they're going to win games. If he gets traded to Philly, he's going to show up, he's going to play hard, they're going to win games. Like, there's zero confidence that Dame is going to be James Harden. They're wired differently.
Yeah, well, we thought the same thing about Paul George, right? Like when Paul George was getting traded out of Indiana, the notion was out there that if Paul George was traded to anywhere but the Lakers, that he would either not show up or he would sulk, and he certainly wouldn't re-sign. Like there's no chance that Paul George is going to stay wherever he is traded if it isn't the Lakers long term. And then guess what happens? He makes that shitty documentary and makes us all watch 7 parts of it, and eventually arrives at the very end of it to tell us that he is in fact staying in Oklahoma City. And like, by the way, if I were Minnesota, I would make that gamble. Happily make that. You don't get Dame otherwise, you know? Yeah. If I was Brooklyn, I would make that gamble happily again because he isn't wired the same way Kyrie is wired.
I am stunned, and here I'll give you some Lakers catnip here. I am stunned that the Boston Celtics are arrogant enough to be like, we will not include Jaylen Brown in this trade. We're not going to do this deal. Guys,
hilarious.
Jaylen Brown has openly broadcast to you for months his unhappiness. He's been irritated with you over trade requests. He is not a big fan of
Boston.
The cultural attitudes in the greater Massachusetts area. There's all
which went over super well, by the way. Which only compounded the issue.
So I'm not saying that like Jaylen's going to ask out, but I'm saying you have an opportunity to go get a chance. Like you make a run now. You go get Dame, and all of a sudden, not only are you the favorites, which they already are, you go get Dame, and you have Dame, Tatum, Porzingis, good roster backing you. You would have to give up Jaylen Brown and maybe some picks. Like the value you would get, you don't have to give up this gigantic haul. You have an all NBA player you're sending to Portland. Like, Portland would be like, well, hell, you can just build around Jaylen and Scoot and here's Jeremy Grant and just like, at least we'll be pretty good and we can figure this out because we've already got Scoot.
Yeah.
Like, there's all these opportunities for you if you were to do this, but they're so arrogant as to think like, no. This is the year that Jaylen Brown learns how to dribble. This is the year. Cash in, man. And like, I think Jaylen Brown's amazing. I thought he was incredible last year. Like there was a stretch where he was averaging 30 a game as the second best guy on the floor. But you have a chance to go if you're serious and you're like banner 18's the goal. And your problem has been that you don't have a point guard. Go get Dame. Yeah, you will miss on Jaylen Brown's last 6 years of his career, which will last longer than Dame and be better than the next 6 years of Dame for sure. Yeah, but like you do have to choose, and this is a great opportunity for him. So it's baffling to me that Boston, as great as Jaylen Brown is, and I do think he's awesome, that Boston has his ultimate trump card. If they just go to Joe Cronin and are like, we'll give you Jaylen Brown and 2 picks. That's better than this smorgasbord platter of garbage that the Heat are throwing at them and forcing them to swallow. Yeah. Go take Jaylen Brown. Go do the Jaylen Brown trade. It's crazy to me that there's enough arrogance in the Boston Celtics franchise to be like, no, we don't need Dame. I get it. You made the finals and then you made the Eastern Conference finals. I get you're close, but that gap matters. That gap matters. And you have a chance to shore it up. Take it.
Yeah, well, over the last, 35 years or so, they have so much success to call back on that, you can understand the arrogance. All right, this has been a blast. It is always a blast, Matt. Again, Matt is of the Action Network. They do incredible work on gambling and just on content in general. I really enjoyed your stuff over the course of free agency as well. So that is the Action Network. They have an app that I happily have on my home screen, especially during the playoffs this last year. I had that every time there was a game I was getting ready to bet. It's super easy to figure out not just what my favorite like analysts information is, but a combination of all of your guys' analysts over there and you know where the majority of people will say we're standing on some of those bets. So that is very good stuff. Is there anything in particular you want to plug before we get you out of here?
I do have a look at the Lakers and about their value and about like where are they at? Are they better? Are they worse? Or where they're at? You can check that out on the app, as well as I'll have win total stuff all throughout the summer. As soon as win totals drop, we'll have articles up immediately talking about the best bets to make over there on the Action Network app.
Great. All right. Well, I'll see you in about 24 hours or so.
See you then, buddy.